Zach looked so precarious perched there on the ledge, doing his best to hold still. Every few minutes, Zach would get restless and move just slightly. And just slightly was all it could take to end up back in the river. Rich wasn't sure how much longer Zach could hang on.
As a 12-year-old boy, he had never held still a moment in his life. And I forced in his mind, you have to sit still. You cannot afford to go in.
The water level was rising, getting closer and closer to Zach's tiny ledge. Rich's heart pounded as he realized if Zach fell back in, there would be no more chances.
There's a big drop, a waterfall that's only about 100 foot downstream, and if he gets back in that river, he's not going to survive it.
This is the Miracle Files. I'm Emily Jones.
And I'm Holly Worthington. We're two sisters who love a captivating true story, but we're also seeking more light in our lives.
So we're on a mission to find and share unforgettable, uplifting stories of God's miracles. We hope you'll join us on this journey.
Welcome back to the Miracle Files. We've already made you wait long enough to see how this story ends, so we're just going to jump right into it. But first, here's a recap of part 1.
We saw part of the waterfall, but you could almost not see it because the wind just started howling.
They hurried to cross the stream, but unbeknownst to the Greenbergs, the water level was rising rapidly as unseen rain poured down from the distant mountains above.
And out of the corner of my eye and my peripheral vision, I see Zach slip. And in essence, it felt like someone really strong and powerful shoved me from behind. And now Marla, who's in the backpack with me, and my son Zach are now fighting for our lives in heavy rapids. Further downstream, I saw a man standing on the riverbank, and I screamed as loud as I could, "Help!" I had no idea what was happening with Marla. Mike got in the river, and he extends this 9-foot extendable tripod.
Rich managed to grasp hold of the tripod. Mike pulled with all of his might, dragging Rich across the river to the shore.
I rip off the backpack.
Miraculously, Marla was still in the backpack.
And I just hand her in the backpack to these total strangers because I'm now panicked about my son.
Racing down the trail, Rich pleaded with God to help his son.
I called aloud to God, "Please, God, don't let him die. Please, God, don't let him die."
All right, here is Flood of Miracles, Part 2. A hidden current, a sudden pull. One misstep, and Zach was gone. Rich Greenberg watched helplessly as a powerful flash flood dragged his 12-year-old son, Zach, downstream. The churning water pulled Zach under, leaving only his head visible in the rapids. In the now turbulent river, Zach fought the current to no avail. He saw a couple of adults shouting to him from the shore, but it was impossible to reach them. He clawed at slippery rocks and stray branches, but the rushing water tore him away every time. His strength was fading fast. Up the river on the hiking trail, Rich ran barefoot after his son. His heart pounded like thunder in his chest, his desperation mounting. He knew all too well how treacherous this river was. He cried out to God as he ran, pleading with his whole heart for a miracle. Down the trail, Rich found Mike's mom, Karen, and her partner, Nino. They had seen Zach in the river and had chased after him.
As Zach was floating downstream, they were running alongside the best they could, telling him, "Keep your legs up," so that he wouldn't make contact with the boulders in the river. And so as I came across them, I was screaming frantically, "Have you seen my son? Have you seen my boy?"
There was something unsettling about the expressions on Karen's and Nino's faces. A look of horror mixed with wonder.
And they said, "He's over there." And they point across the river. And now the river's swollen. It's good 30 to 40 feet across. And on the opposite side of the river, there's a several 100-foot rock wall that's nearly vertical. It's unclimbable, and it's just covered with shrubs and vines and greenery. And inset to this wall is a tiny little ledge. And there, sitting on that ledge, but only by the power of God, is my son. with his glasses intact.
Rich blinked in shock at the sight of his son. How could it be? In the midst of a raging river, Zach had somehow grabbed hold of a moss-covered ledge several feet above him and pulled his body up onto it. It made no logical sense. And yet, somehow Zach sat there, squatting on the ledge, his backpack still on, only missing one shoe and his glasses even still propped on his nose. An overwhelming wave of relief washed over Rich. The tightness in his chest relaxed. For a moment, his breathing returned. But then another question hit Rich with more power than the torrential current. What now?
And I'm in total emotional wreck. I want to drop to my knees and cry and thank God, but I knew I didn't want to scare Zach. And so I told him I loved him. I told him I was so proud of him. I told him he had to stay still, that he couldn't fall back in the river.
Unfortunately, Rich wasn't sure how much Zach could hear over the roar of the rapids. Soon, a few other hikers joined Rich, staring at Zach in dismay. Mike and Stacy brought Marla and joined the onlookers. Suddenly, a thought struck Rich. What must his wife be thinking? She had to be terrified. He darted back up the trail to where the boulder stood out of the water that had stopped him and Marla. There, he saw his wife, Carrie, standing on the other side of the river, her face pale with worry. She was now trapped with Samantha and their friend Steve, along with some other hikers, and couldn't cross the river. Rich shouted to them.
And so I told him, Zach is alive. And she said, you're sure? I said, Zach's alive. And that's all I said. I didn't tell her anything else. I was totally out of my mind. And you could just see the emotion that she had, not knowing, and the relief that she had. So I ran back downstream and totally out of my mind. I could focus on one thing and one thing only, and that was the safety of my son. Here was my young daughter with special needs. She was 3, but she was probably the size of a 14, 15-month-old, shivering in a diaper, sopping wet. And I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician, and nothing registered. And all these people said, we got to get her out of the clothes. They stripped her down. They donated all their gear. They gave me some of their shoes. They wrapped her in fleece blankets. And then they said, we're going to send our 2 fastest runners, Jessica and Joanna, who are sisters, down to get help for your son. And so they took off running.
Rich looked across the river, relieved to see Zach hanging on. But fear still coursed through Rich like a freight train. The water level was rising, getting closer and closer to Zach's tiny ledge. Rich's heart pounded as he realized if Zach fell back in, there would be no more chances. The rapids were terrifying enough, but lurking down the river was something more deadly.
There's a big drop, a waterfall that's only about 100 foot downstream, and if he gets back in that river, he's not going to survive it. We had gone over a couple of falls, a small and a medium drop on our way, but this was a big fall that he couldn't survive.
And then things went from bad to worse.
The storm that had moved from above the waterfall now had come full force, and so it was pouring harder than I knew it could rain. And there were huge gusts of winds, and the noise was deafening because you had the river and the wind and the rain. And Mike and Stacy offered to take Marla with them, and they said, we're going to go get her help. You can trust us. And I said, I trust you. You saved my life, but I just have this feeling that I need to keep my daughter with me. And they said, yeah, but he said, I have a little bit of medical experience. I think she needs to be checked out. And I said, thank you so much, but I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician. I can see she's okay. I just know she needs to be with me. And so I kept her there. They went downstream. And about an hour later, Jessica and Joanna came back.
Rich looked at the 2 young women, hoping they'd found help. Unfortunately, they had bad news.
They said, we went to the next river crossing and we can't cross it. It's too dangerous, so we can't get help for your son.
Rich's heart sank. Once again, he was faced with the brutal truth. There was nothing he could do to help his son, and time was running out.
And I know at some point it's going to get dark and a bad situation is going to get worse. And, I was sitting on this rock with Marla, bundled in these fleece, pouring rain, trying to keep her under there, just praying and praying and praying and talking to Zach as much as I could. I was singing to Marla near continuously her favorite song, Heavenly Father, are you really there? Do you hear and answer every child's prayer? Praying, trying not to let Zach see me cry. If I needed to cry, I peeked my head under the fleece with Marla. started sobbing really quick, only to have Marla touch my face and say, okay, daddy, give me a little pep talk. And then I'd pull my head out and talk to Zach.
The hikers took turns doing all they could to keep Marla dry. One of the hikers tried to get Rich to cover himself as well with one of the fleece blankets.
He tried to get me to cover myself, but I wouldn't. I was like, all the blankets and fleece and stuff are for Marla. And he's like, no, you got to take care of yourself. You got to drink. And at that point, I had no desire. I just wanted to get Zach off that rock and keep Marla warm and dry.
As Rich sat there, another thought dawned on him. He hadn't told his wife, Carrie, that their son was still in danger. And as much as he dreaded telling her, she needed to know. Once again, Rich left Marla with the hikers and ran back upstream. He shouted across the river.
And I said to Carrie, I neglected to tell you in my craziness of the situation that Zach's alive and okay, but he's across this river on this tiny little ledge, and we're going to have to figure a way to get him out of there. And then you could see now the panic in her eyes set back in, and she said to me, the backpack that you were carrying Marla in and your camelback are about to get swept in the river over there. My initial thought was, who cares? It's a backpack. I could care less about those things.
In the chaos of the moment, Rich felt like the backpacks were the least of his concerns, and they lay dangerously close to the rising river. But as Rich stood there, he felt prompted to follow his wife's advice.
But it was her wisdom. I just had this thought, you need to go get that backpack right now. So I walked carefully because it was right near the river's edge and I didn't want to get swept back in, and it was on slippery rocks, and I carefully retrieved those backpacks. Thank goodness for the intuition and the spirit my wife has to instruct me to do so. Because later I realized as I was with Marla, she didn't eat or drink anything. So she was totally tube fed. In these backpacks that I retrieved were the syringes that I needed to keep her hydrated as we waited for a rescue. So I go back and I'm sitting on this rock. Time is just passing by.
Zach looked so precarious, still perched there on the ledge, doing his best to hold still. Every few minutes, Zach would get restless and move just slightly. And just slightly was all it could take to end up back in the river. Rich wasn't sure how much longer Zach could hang on.
As a 12-year-old boy, he had never held still a moment in his life, except maybe for a few seconds of sleeping each night. He was wiggly, moving, couldn't hold still, needed something to do all the time. And I forced in his mind, you have to sit still on this rock. You cannot afford to go in. So Nino and I instructed him to pull his feet up as far as he can and scoot as far back on that ledge as he could. He was just sitting there across this 40-foot raging river, had to scream and use hand signals to get even any message across to him.
Over 3 hours had now passed, with no sign of any kind of rescue in sight. With shivering hands, Zach carefully pulled off his own backpack and found a sandwich inside of it. He then pulled out a shirt from his backpack. Shaking violently, Zach tried to cover himself with the shirt. As time passed, the cramped ledge grew more and more unbearable for Zach's body and mind. Rich ached for his boy, wishing desperately that he could help him.
I'm thinking to myself, if it gets dark, the river's rising, it's pouring rain. Over the hours we were there, people watch boulders being swallowed up as this river is rising. I think he's going to fall asleep. We had hiked for hours. He's exhausted by hours waiting there. He's going to fall asleep. He's going to get swept in the river and he's going to 100% sure die. So I thought to myself, there's zero chance I'm going to allow that to happen. And so I said to myself, if it gets near dark, I'm going to hand Marla off to one of these strangers, teach them how to manage her tube, and I'm going in that river again and try and get to that ledge because there's no way I'm going to allow my son to die.
As Rich contemplated his options, a hiker named John approached Rich.
He said, I've got to go downstream and get help for your son because if it gets dark, this is going to get a bad situation. And I said, please be careful. I don't want you to get hurt. And he said, I will. And so he goes downstream. It just happens that this man, John's hiking this very day and this very time. And he happens to be an expert outdoorsman who had done these 7-day races. And he had all of this skill.
John, athletic and strong, hoped he could make it across the river somehow. He knew he couldn't just stand there and watch as the river level rose and the sky grew darker and let this boy get swept away forever.
Here were these total strangers, donating their gear, willing to risk their safety and life. And so here's this man, he gets in chest-deep, raging, flooded river, and he watches the currents. And he crosses part way. There was a little kind of small landmass, a tiny island in this river crossing, and he got all the way there, was able to wave to all of his fellow hikers and family that, hey, I made it this far. And then he went a little bit further to the next section of river, and it was too dangerous. He just knew it was too dangerous.
John was further downstream attempting this crossing, and therefore Rich could not see what happened. However, Rich was informed that John was unable to cross the river. That was a punch to the gut. But then Rich learned of something else unfolding. A group of hikers on the other side of the river noticed John and got close enough that John could call to them.
He immediately springs into action and starts yelling at them, hey, we've got to get help. There's this boy in desperate need of help. And so these people run down to the next river crossing and they can't cross. And then they play this game of telephone and they yell across to the other people and they say, we'll go get help. And then those people had to run 2 miles back to the start of the hike where there's a beach and there's a lifeguard they found. And they radio down to the air rescue team, who's about 40 miles south in a city called Lahui. So they get the radio call, and it had been passed from person to person. So at this point, they just knew the river is flooded, which it does happen sometimes, and people are in danger.
Rich hoped and prayed the message would reach someone who could help them. But he was also realistic. He knew the chances of a helicopter coming out in a raging storm like this were beyond minute.
And as an ER doc at Primary Children's at the time, I knew it was the pilot's decision to fly or not to fly based on weather. And I knew from that experience, the pilot doesn't put his crew in danger, because there had been some crashes and some deaths. They don't put their crew in danger under torrential downpour and crazy conditions. I thought, there's no way they're getting a helicopter in this valley.
Rich figured if anyone was coming for them, they would have to hike in, and it would take time. And time was something they didn't have. Zach had now been on the ledge for nearly 5 hours, and the sun began dipping in the sky. Their situation was getting more and more dire by the minute. Zach tried to stay alert, but he was exhausted and freezing. The water level neared the bottom of the ledge now. Marla shivered in Rich's arms, yet he could offer her no warmth. Karen left to go find a different blanket. Nino stood with Rich, trying to offer moral support, but Rich felt helpless, and despair began to take hold of his heart. A tragic ending for his family seemed as inevitable as the darkening sky. Just then, Rich heard a tiny voice call to him. It came from his poor, sopping wet, trembling, suffering, tender, yet mighty Marla.
Marla says to me, pray. And when Marla says pray, usually that means she wants me to sing her song. Heavenly Father, are you really there? Do you hear and answer every child's prayer? So I say, do you want to sing? And I start singing, and she says, pray. She's interrupting me, and she keeps saying pray. And I said, do you want to say a prayer? And it was clear she was asking me to say a prayer. And so I helped her, and she said this sweet, beautiful prayer, Dear Heavenly Father, and we asked for Zach's protection and ended in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Rich looked up from the prayer. Through the driving rain, some of the other hikers ran toward them and laid a waterproof blanket over Marla. And then, Rich heard the most incredible sound. It couldn't be, yet it was. The faint chop of a helicopter echoed in the distance, its thrum growing stronger with each passing second. His heart leapt at the thought. Was help really on the way? The helicopter soared into view, its pilot waving to let their group know he was aware of them. He flew past and then looped around.
Here comes this helicopter flying downstream towards us. And there's a man in a harness, tethered by a rope 100 feet below the helicopter.
The helicopter hovered over their group. There wasn't a minute to spare. Rich waved to get the helicopter's attention. Yes, save my son, he thought. He's running out of time. But then Rich's stomach dropped like a bowling ball. He watched as the man hanging below the helicopter swooped down, landed on the ground, and grabbed one of the hikers standing on the shore.
And as is their protocol, the man's name is Aaron, the rescue worker. He grabs the first person that he can get a hold of, because it was later in the day and they knew they could only rescue so many people with the gas they had and the time of day, because once it gets dark, they can't do this. So he grabs this man, Eric, who was one of the hikers who was there helping us, and he starts putting him in the harness. And Nino, Eric, and I are screaming at this man, like, why is he helping this person when my son is in so much danger?
In panic, the crowd flapped their arms and screamed and yelled. Aaron, the rescue worker, looked around at them, confused at the response. From Aaron's vantage point, he couldn't see Zach at all.
And so we're yelling at him, and he's like, what are you talking about? And we're pointing to him because it's so loud you can't communicate. And we point across, and he finally sees Zach stranded on this ledge.
If you can imagine, this scene was something Aaron had never experienced before. No training could have prepared him for a young boy perched precariously on a small ledge above a roaring river next to a sheer cliff. We interviewed Aaron so he could describe his own thoughts and feelings at this shocking moment. Here's Aaron.
So I lowered in through the trees. I'm on a 100-foot line going through a large canopy, so the pilot and captain can't really see that well. As I went in through the trees, I landed there and grabbed the first guy I came up to, said, okay, I'm going to get you out of here. And he says, leave me, go save the boy. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he points across the river, and that was the first time I saw Zach hanging onto the rocks in the river there. I had no idea that he was even up in this area.
Aaron had to devise a plan quickly.
I knew I didn't have any time to waste, and I couldn't grab Zach and put a kid up on another ledge without any supervision. And so I just told that guy, I'm going to take you first. You're going to become my, basically what we call casualty collection point. You're going to be my guy, and I'm bringing everyone to you. And we flew up to our upper landing zone.
Aaron radioed the helicopter. His shock couldn't be contained.
After I dropped him, we flew back to Zach's location. And I remember telling the captain and the pilot, we get this kid in the water, we got kind of a radical situation coming up. And the captain said, okay, you're going to have to take a deep breath and slow down. I didn't understand anything you said. So I must have been pretty excited because I was talking really fast.
Aaron explained to the pilot what he wanted him to do. But of course, Aaron had no idea if any of it would work. This was a risk, but it was one he was willing to take.
So I explained the situation again. I told him just lower me straight into the water across from these guys, and then you're just going to have to swing me into the cliff, because Zach was hanging on and there was an overhang above him, so we couldn't come directly down to him. And they put me about maybe waist deep in the water, thigh deep to waist deep in the raging water, and then I just had them start moving me in.
Rich and the other hikers watched what was happening. Everyone held their breath as they saw Aaron try to swing towards Zach. Aaron did the best he could to communicate with the pilot above him.
And Aaron's using hand signals like, go this way, go this way, go this way. And all of a sudden he gives him the kill signal by, going his hand across his neck like, hey, this is as close as we're going to get. So the pilot now is holding the helicopter totally dead still with torrential downpour and huge gusts of winds while Aaron was motioning Zach. You could see Zach's hesitancy, like I had drilled for 5 hours. You can't fall in, you can't fall in, do not move, stay on that ledge, stay back, pull back, pull back. And then when the helicopter came and it was blowing him, and I was like, you gotta hold on, you gotta hold on. I was just watching and watching. I'm like, how is this guy gonna get to him? And he's trying, like he's holding on to this branch and he's trying to pull himself, but the conditions are such he can't get closer.
Both Aaron and Zach found themselves in a conundrum. The question of the day still filled the air with tension. What now?
And I got about maybe 6 feet away from Zach. And I'm thinking, okay, not really sure how I'm going to do this. Eventually the rope's going to hit. I'm not going to be able to get to him. Zach's looking at me and he says, I don't know what to do. I was like, well, I'm in that same boat. I'm not sure how we're going to do with this either.
Aaron motioned with his fingers to see if Zach could scoot any closer to him. But instead, Zach did something that shocked everyone. Without warning, he leaped into the air. Rich and all the hikers gasped in horror. Aaron was caught completely off guard, but there was only one thing left to do. He reached for Zach.
I caught him, and I just wrapped my legs around him.
In a moment of relief, Aaron realized he had hold of the boy. but both Aaron and Zach sank deep into the water.
And the current pulled us out into the opening, and I was unable to now use the radio because I couldn't key the mic. So I couldn't reach up with my hand because I'm holding on to Zach. And we're getting bucked around pretty good in the water here.
Aaron clung to Zach with all his strength, but the current still threatened to pull Zach from his grasp.
And as the current brings us into the opening, now the helicopter could finally see us. And when we're unable to use our hands in the rescue, we put a big cross on top of our helmet. And then we use head signals in order to indicate what we need the pilot to do. So I was able to signal him with my head to tell him, take us up. So he lifted us up out of the stream, which was great at first. But I was thinking, okay, we'll go to the bank and I'll package this kid up because I'm holding on to Zach. He's holding on to me. Next thing you know, I'm 200, 500 feet up in the air. I'm like, uh-oh. That's a little more exciting than I wanted it to be.
The hikers watched as Aaron and Zach were lifted into the sky. Rich hugged Nino, crying in disbelief.
The pilot airlifts him hundreds of feet in the air, and I'm watching this in pure amazement, like, I can't believe this is actually happening, let alone happening to me. It's a scene that Hollywood couldn't recreate if they wanted to. And just, we're so grateful that God had seen fit to perform this miracle.
Aaron held tight to Zach as Zach gripped Aaron in return. They flew through the air with no harness on Zach at all, but it was a moment of triumph nonetheless. Soon, the pilot set Zach and Aaron down carefully on the landing zone. At last, both Aaron and Zach heaved a giant sigh of relief. But Aaron didn't have time to sit and celebrate. He had more lives to save. When it was Rich's turn to go, a new fear washed over him.
Aaron came back, grabbed Nino. I told him about Marla because he didn't really know about Marla. And he said, go get your daughter, I'm going to rescue Nino, and then you're next.
Rich watched as Nino was secured and lifted into the air.
And so I saw how I was going to get rescued, and unfortunately I have a, let's say, healthy respect, or i.e. a terrible fear of heights. So I knew it was about to happen, and I didn't want it, but I knew I had no other choice. And so I said to myself, okay, don't say anything, don't say anything, don't say anything. And so he lands, and he starts putting both Marla and I in the same harness because he's like, it's only designed for one, and he's got us wrapped in this harness. And I just stare at him and I say, I just couldn't help it. This guttural thing came out of me. I said, I'm deathly afraid of heights. And he was so annoyed at me. Here he was risking his life to save me and my family, and here I'm being a wimp. And he just stared right in my eyes and he said, too bad for you. We got to get you the hell out of here. And he said, go. And then so we're airlifted, and he's just holding on to us. He didn't have to, but he just, especially with Marla there, he just held on to us. And I closed my eyes almost the whole time because I was dead scared. And then he landed us on this ledge.
The instant Rich was free from his harness, he ran straight to Zach and wrapped his son tightly in his arms. He held him there, sobbing, in an embrace that said everything words never could.
And I ran over and embraced him, and one of the most beautiful, beautiful moments of my life, being able to hold my boy again. Then Aaron went and rescued everyone else from my side of the river, and then went upstream and one by one rescued Carrie and Samantha and Steve and Margaret and Anson, the other couple that were there.
It was supposed to be a simple day, a family hike to a scenic waterfall. Instead, it was an experience that no one would ever forget. Zach Greenberg had held onto a rock, to life. Rich had held on to faith. Little Marla had held on to prayer. A group of hikers held on to hope. And Aaron had held on to a scrawny 12-year-old boy in a harrowing flight through the air. It was a story of strength, of family, and a moment where everything could have ended very differently, but for the heroic individuals and God. This experience is now a memory for the Greenberg family, but Rich, Carrie, and their children will forever hold on, together, to the flood of miracles they received.
This family really did experience so many miracles.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest of those is how in the world did Zach get up on that ledge?
I know. Karen and Nino said they watched him and he used his non-dominant hand
Yeah.
to reach up somehow, He grabs onto this almost vertical rock wall and pulls himself up on these slippery moss-covered rocks.
While he's getting pulled away in the current. Like,
it really
how?
does seem almost impossible, but
Yeah.
not with God.
Yeah. So we actually interviewed Zach, and we have a soundbite from him that we'd love to share.
I don't know how I got onto the sledge. It's definitely a miracle. But somehow I was going feet first down the river. My belly was facing upward in the water. And somehow with my left hand, I was able to grab onto a mossy rock that started to go in an incline. That happened to be a section with the only section of that sheer wall with a little ledge where I was able to sit. And I don't know how, I don't remember. I know that definitely God was there, and he blessed me with angels and strength to be able to do that. And I was able to just sit there. For most people, like, sitting is pretty typical and okay, but I was very hyperactive, always fidgeting, always doing something. I could never sit still. My parents had to try to teach me, and had to work with the teachers to make it so I wasn't too disruptive during class, even just my finger tapping or just me running around class. But God definitely blessed me with a peace of mind and calm composure to be able to sit still on this tiny little ledge.
What a miracle. Rich actually went back a year or two later to this ledge that Zach had been sitting on, and he tried to climb up on this ledge, and he said it was almost impossible. It was really hard for him, and he is a grown man.
Yeah, and there was no current pulling him when he did it.
Yeah, I didn't have to fight this river. I mean, it is amazing, and I truly believe that there were angels that helped him on that ledge.
I do too. I absolutely believe that. And how crazy was it too that Aaron just caught Zach when Zach unexpectedly just leaped into the air at him?
That was the craziest part. I love what Zach said about that.
When he was about 5 feet across from the river, holding onto the branches to stay close to the wall with the river dragging his feet backwards, he motioned to me, come closer, come closer. But I thought he was saying, come to me, jump to me. I don't remember jumping, but I remember just being on the ledge, and all of a sudden I was in his arms. Somehow I was able to jump into his arms, and he was able to miraculously let go of the branch, catch onto me, and just hold me. At the time, I thought one of my legs had gotten into the harness, and that was safe, and I was okay, and I was good. But it turns out that it hadn't gotten into that, and he had just caught me and held on to me and just bear hugged me.
And now something else that we weren't able to get into in the story is that Aaron got all the people off the river that night who were immediately around Rich, Zach, and Marla. But there were a bunch of hikers that still remained stranded there all night long. Yeah,
over 70 people.
Yeah.
They're still on the mountain.
Mm-hmm. And Aaron actually stayed with those people overnight. I mean, you want to talk about a hero. Amazing. Aaron is such a hero. And here's what Aaron said about that night.
The whole ground was just moving with water, and the fire was just barely going. And so we started getting some people that were really getting cold. So the only shelter that we had out there, hard shelter, was an outhouse. And so people started piling into this outhouse, the ones that were really cold. And I think they set a record for how many people you could get in an outhouse, because, it was a wooden one, like a composting outhouse, but they had 18 people in there or something. And then at that, they blocked the door. They wouldn't let anyone else in. So, turned out to be a long night, but we got the critical ones into the outhouse, and everybody else, we just, buddied up and tried to keep the fire going and keep moving. And, if you get really cold, get up and do some lunges and some squats and keep the blood in your legs, and essentially did that till the morning time. And then the helicopter came back in for us, and we started loading everybody in 3 at a time, flying them out.
So the next day, when the helicopter was bringing everybody back from being rescued, there was someone there waiting for them. It was Zach and his dad, Rich, and they were handing out muffins and water. They felt so worried about those people that they knew were still out there that night in the cold. Yeah. And they wanted to do something to help out the next day.
Rich said he felt so guilty going home and sleeping in this nice warm bed when many of the people who helped rescue his son were still out there in the freezing cold rain. And I mean, obviously Zach's situation was the most dire. But
Well,
there were
yeah,
still
and
people out there.
Marla, yeah, and Marla needed
Marla.
care too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously they needed to get them home
Right.
first. But yeah, there's one more thing that we have to mention too. So, and to me, this is definitely a huge part of the miracle. Before all of this happened, the county council in Kauai had discussed cutting the funds for the air rescue team. And I mean, helicopters are expensive, and the council had pretty much made up their minds that they couldn't keep giving money to this program and that it would be disbanded. So 2 days after Zach was rescued, the county council held a meeting to decide if the air rescue team would continue to receive funding or not.
Yeah, and after Zach and Rich were rescued, Rich was interviewed, and they played a recording of his interview at this council meeting. And here's a clip from that.
His name is Aaron Hawthorne, is the one who rescued my son Zachary, and the pilot's name was Cliff. But there were other people, I don't know the other rescuers' name, who were involved, but it was only through the act of God and through their heroic efforts that our family saved.
In this video, you can see Zach, and you get a sense of just how young he was.
Yeah.
I mean, I have an 11-year-old son, and I cannot imagine having him trapped in this kind of situation, going through something so traumatic like this.
Yeah. And you can just hear in the video Rich's like sincere gratitude. And when the council members saw this video, saw the faces of Rich and Zach, and I mean, how could that not affect your heart? And the council ended up voting unanimously to continue the funding of the air rescue team. And here's what Rich said about it.
Here's this rescue team that's about to lose their funding, and because they perform this one miracle and I get interviewed, that it helps save their team. And now, I mean, it's been 10 plus years. They rescue about 70 people a year. So you do the math of how many people's lives have been affected by God performing this miracle just for our family, and how much it touches people's lives. And I think it's a reminder of that God exists, and that God is real, and that God is good.
God is real, and he is so good. And there were just so many amazing people in this story who are willing to help complete strangers. And Rich actually wrote all of this up in a book. So if you want to hear more details about this story, or purchase it as a gift for a friend who you think might enjoy this story, his book is called Surviving a Miracle. And one last thing before we go, Zach has a message for the people who helped rescue him.
I want to thank them. Thank them for putting their lives on the line and for all the amazing work they do. They're so selfless, and they're so humble about it as well. And I want to thank them and everyone who works in similar positions that they do, who risk their lives blessing other people. God definitely had his hand directing and leading us, and he was definitely blessing us with many tender mercies and a lot of miracles. He is so present in each of our lives, both in the big things and small things. He really does care and love for us.
Thank you so much to your whole family, Rich and Zach. And thank you to Aaron for sharing this story with us. And thanks to all of the rescue team and the hikers who all pitched in to help this family and to help each other. People. All of you, your examples just shine so brightly. Thank you for joining us. If you have a miracle to share, contact us at themiraclefiles.com or find us on Facebook.
We're now releasing multiple episodes each month, so subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube for amazing video content as well.
Join us next time as we discover more of God's miracles, and don't forget to look for his light in your own lives.